Health and safety is incredibly important when setting up camera equipment. Garth taught us that when setting up a tripod, you should always increase from the top so that the base is sturdy and less likely to topple over and damage not only the equipment but the people and other objects within the vicinity. There are various technologies within a camera which allows the user to film, store visuals, and be able to transfer the gathered information so that the product can be viewed by an audience. Modern HD cameras such as DSLRs include chips which detect light sent through the lens and then divides light by trichroic prism assembly. This entails the light being sectioned into 3 colors, RGB, red, green, blue, in order for the correct wavelength to reach the suitable sensor, which will then transform the information into a digital signal which will be received by the computer processing system in the camera, which will recognize the colors and produce an image that can be seen on the monitor. The aperture is responsible for controlling the amount of light received by the sensor in the camera and the depth of field, which refers to how much of the shot is in focus. The aperture can be described as an iris. Similar to the iris in the eye, a wider aperture can lead to more light being detected. So without careful consideration of the sources of light within a filming space, an enlarged aperture can lead to an overexposed visual. Alternatively, a small aperture can cause a visual to be underexposed. The shutter speed in a digital camera refers to how long the sensor stays activated for. For example, a shutter speed of 1/25th is equal to 1/25th of a second, so the camera will take one frame in 1/25th of a second. Slower shutter speeds will lead to more light being recognized by the camera as the sensor will be activated for longer. This could help create cinematic, slightly smeared images, which audiences recognize as natural and typical of film and reality. ISO involves the sensitivity of the sensor. Increasing the sensitivity increases the exposure level. The visual will be brighter, but the sensor becomes more sensitive to the RGB colors in the visual, which could lead to the unpleasant presence of noise. And noise is caused by electrical interference. Most cameras have a native ISO, which is often the best setting for filming. For example, the Sony A7 has a native ISO of 3200, which would be dangerously too high for entry-level cameras. A lens can change the relationship between the viewer and the text in the shot. There are a variety of lenses which filmmakers use to address the audience and convey the film's concept. Telephoto lenses squash the Z-axis and so makes the subjects and objects in a scene appear much closer. These lenses are useful for depicting themes such as claustrophobia and isolation, in addition to building suspense in a chase scene, where the victim may be running whilst the villain is strolling along, but because we used a long lens, the distance between the victim and attacker would appear closer. Contrastingly, wide-angle lenses leads to distorted angles and an overall cold appearance, which is useful for depicting dream sequences or an unnatural setting such as the Queen for a Dream. There are numerous sources of lighting which can be used for filming, such as natural light or artificial light. When using artificial electrical lighting, health and safety must be considered. For example, in a studio which uses electrical light, your knees should never touch the floor. You should always bend down or squat if need be, as direct contact could give you an electric shock. Cables should always be firmly placed on the ground, using materials such as gaffer tape placed out of harm's way in areas such as under the lighting stand, so that the cables are not a tripping hazard. Everyone in the location should know beforehand if a light is turning on, as a faulty light may lead to the bulb exploding and molten glass flying everywhere. So the cast and crew members are warned beforehand so that they can shield their eyes or run for cover when required. When using a stand with an operating light, before you've even switched on anything, always tap with the back of the hand or use gloves to avoid receiving an electric shock, as the stand may be exuding electricity. When humans receive an electric shock, our muscles contract, so use the back of the hand so that they contract away from the stand and not grab onto it for dear life, or death in this case. Try to use gloves for touching anything that could be risky, such as the barn doors on a light, as these can get extremely hot. Barry taught us a specific method for setting up light called blurs: block, light, rehearse, and shoot. So first you would give the actors movement directions so that they move into the light perfectly. Light would be setting up the light to suit the shoot. Rehearse would involve the actors practicing their movements according to the lighting, and shoot, the actual filming. Humans have a primitive preference for light. We like lighting from above, as in the era of our primitive ancestors, lighting came from only the sun, and so above lighting is normal for us. We like shadows coming down from an angle, preferably the subject subject would have a shadow across their face. For example, Rembrandt lighting involves a source of lighting being reflected onto that subject at an angle. Normally the subject would have a nose shadow, which produces a triangle-shaped shadow on the face. Rembrandt, the artist, painted the reflection of light in the eye, which modern society has deemed aesthetically pleasing. Flat lighting is great for bringing out all of the features, but humans prefer angled lighting as it seems more natural. A camera requires more light than the human eye to recognize all of the details in an image. Different lights have different color temperatures, and cameras, unlike human eyes, do not automatically adjust the white balance to suit the color temperature in the location. Color temperature is a measure of how blue or orange things are. Indoor light can be described as orange light, whereas outdoor light can be described as blue light. Sometimes lighting can be too harsh, and so we disperse the lighting on a subject using diffusers or a bounce. A bounce reflects light onto a subject, which lowers the intensity of the light and is useful for evening out harsh shadows. We can adjust artificial lighting using materials such as gels, which are transparent plastic materials which can change the colouring of the light. However, we normally use straightforward white lighting because we can add reds and blues and greens in post. We use histograms to find the right balance of the colours in an image and observe this using a waveform monitor. The human eye can be affected by various factors in the environment, and so simply looking at an image on a monitor to decide whether the colours and exposure is right is wrong, even if you have 20/20 vision. Exposure refers to how light or dark the visuals are when filming. An overexposed shot may corrupt the quality of the visual, which will cause the film to look unprofessional and lack aesthetic appeal. Typically, high spikes on a histogram indicate the quality of the exposure. For example, an overexposed image will have tall spikes towards the left-hand side, as this represents the blacks in the image, whereas an overexposed image will have high spikes towards the right-hand side. The black stripes at the top and bottom of a film are black signals, and if the black in the image matches those signals, then it's underexposed. Using histograms is incredibly important for ensuring that the visuals are well exposed. We can see the detail and that the footage is usable because although adjustments can be made in post-production, it's time-consuming and possibly costly to create that perfect shot that could have been filmed if the exposure levels were initially considered. In our first Conviz film, we were filming at night and outside, so we didn't have our own artificial lights because we didn't have a power source in the location. This led to certain shots being underexposed, and so the brightness was raised in post, but this led to grain and noise appearing on film. The colours in a scene are important too, and to make sure the colours are being recognised accurately and are being recorded correctly, we use vectorscopes. Vectorscopes are used to display colour information on an X and Y axis, which tells us how much colour is being presented. When the points are close to the centre, this suggests there is a lack of colour, and so the colours will be less noticeable on the screen. In another film, we filmed in a marketplace with lots of bold reds and blues and warm Christmas colours, which came out well on screen because we considered the exposure and quality of the image. Histograms are particularly useful for multicam shoots. When using multiple cameras to shoot one scene, we use histograms to ensure that the colour is the same in all the cameras. It creates a sense of continuity and the viewers won't be fazed by the change of shot. For the best image, highlights and shadows should be kept in the centre of the histogram. In some situations, we don't have as much control over the light, such as when we use sunlight, and digital cameras have a primitive dynamic range compared to film. Barry told us that for every 4 shades of colour that film recognises, digital cameras recognises 1, because digital cameras compress the colours into one. To control the light, we can use neutral density filters, such as a neutral density 3.0, which lets in half as much light and is the equivalent of closing the aperture by 1 stop. It's similar to a sunglasses effect, and it's beneficial for when our image is overexposed. Similarly, we can use a scrim for lighting, which is used to limit the amount of artificial light that's let through, such as a red scrim, which lowers the light by 1 stop, or a green scrim, which lowers the light by half a stop. We were taught that the sound makes up 50% of the film. The audio is incredibly important, even if it's a silent film, because the music in silent film or any film is used to enhance the image and communicate the concept of the scene or shot. When recording live sound for a film, it is best to use double system recording, which involves using different machines to record the visuals and audio, as the sound recorders can focus on recording clear, distinct audio, whilst the camera operator can focus on the visuals. It is important to know that the sound varies in different acoustic settings, which can be be determined by the spatial and environmental elements of the location, such as how dry or wet the air is or the altitude. The environment is useful when considering the sound, as it may affect the quality of the recording. We record live sound using microphones, and in a microphone there is a piece of ribbon or coil between two magnets. When we speak, we create vibrations, which vibrate the electromagnetic coil or ribbon inside the microphone. When the ribbon or coil vibrates, there is a change in the magnetic field around the magnet, and this creates an electric signal of 0.075 volts, which needs to be boosted by an amplifier. There are a range of different microphones, such as dynamic and condenser microphones. Dynamic microphones have a frequency range of 50 Hz to 15 kHz and do not need to be powered. When dealing with a new microphone that you're not entirely sure about, for health and safety reasons, you should always assume that it doesn't need to be powered so that you don't damage the equipment. However, some microphones, such as condenser microphones, which have a frequency range of 20 Hz to 20 kHz, need a power supply of up to 48 volts, and these mics will be phantom powered, which will involve powering the mic from an external source, such as a mixer. When filming a scene in which a person speaks into a microphone, we want our equipment to be as discreet as possible, and so our sound recorders may be situated in an area that's quite far away from what the camera can see. But to ensure that the microphone remains connected to the mixer, we use cables which we will have to have neatly taped to the floor and placed out of harm's way for health and safety. We use XLR cables, which stands for exterior live and return cables, which connect our sound equipment. There are two sides to the cable, an XLR-F, which is the female side, and thus has small holes that the microphone can be inserted into, and the XLR-M, which we use to send the signal through to the mixer. Tony Passfeld spoke to us about the SQN4S, which we use to control the sound that's being recorded, use the pins to generate a distinct, clear and usable sound, and to send out the signal to the recorder. However, modern SQN mixers can also record audio input. When selecting a microphone, it's important to consider the pickup pattern, and this would depend on how the image is being recorded. For our film, we used an on-camera microphone, which led to a lot of background noise.
What's that you're drinking, mate?
Oh, it's just this natural coconut juice.
What's it like? Why is it pink?
It's pretty good. Do you want to try some?
For a clear sound, we could have used a directional mic on a boom. Directional mics have a straightforward pickup pattern, and so if aimed exactly at the mouth of the subject, the audio would have fewer interruptions. Media Asset Management, or MAM, is a system which is quite similar to the cloud. It allows for people in various locations to work on the same film. It's a storage system in which footage and other data can be uploaded to be attained by those with access. The MAM system is a time-effective and cost-effective system in which film data such as the footage and recorded sound can be transferred to an editor without having to physically take the stored information to the editor. Metadata is quite similar to tagging or labeling. You use key terms to enable the people to explore the desired materials in the MAM system. For example, you might put details of the time, date, location, camera angles, actors, take, file, etc. to enable people to find data more easily rather than searching through hours worth of data. An example of a media asset management system is Fork, which is available on the Ravensbourne Moodle site, and this program is particularly useful for sending raw footage to editors if I have the SD card. And because of the large amount of space, more data can be transferred in comparison to online transferring systems, which typically allow for more or less 15 gigabytes, but the MAM system allows for terabytes worth of data to be uploaded into the cloud. There are an abundant amount of programs and softwares which we use in post-production. This ranges from Final Cut Pro X to Sony Vegas to Adobe Premiere Pro and to the less student-friendly Avid. These are examples of non-linear editing systems, which means in previous eras, editors would have to look through each frame of a reel to cut and edit. But now that we have digital editing software, we can skip through and go to specific scenes. I use Adobe Premiere Pro, and it's been extremely useful for editing films because it offers a range of effects and techniques which can be applied through shortcuts. To import a clip on Adobe Premiere Pro, you must double click in the interface and search for a clip. And import the file. So once the file is imported, you can preview the clip in the interface and use the keyboard shortcuts to select in and out points. To select an in point, you select I, and to select an out point, you select O. And once the in and out point have been selected, you can simply drag it to the timeline. To cut the clip even more, you can simply select C on the keyboard, or press the razor blade tool on the side. And this creates two different clips, which can now be separated. However, to close the gap in between, which will be a black space, you can simply press the delete button, which will close the space in between the gap. There are also effects available on Adobe Premiere Pro. For example, by selecting this clip and pressing Command R, you can play with the speed of the clip. So for example, if you wanted to speed up the clip to perhaps 13 seconds, it's done simply. And you can also separate the audio from the visual by selecting that, or you may delete the audio, and vice versa, you may delete the visuals. And that's what our sped up image looks like. There are also effects in Adobe Premiere Pro, such as video effects, in which you can color correct the image. So for example, if I were to use RGB curves to change the coloring in the image, which will open up this function in which you can manipulate the coloring. So for example, if you were to manipulate the blues by dragging this down, it starts taking away the blues in the image. However, if you were to bring it up, it would start to add more blues to the image. So, similarly with the red and green, by dragging up you add more red, and dragging down you take away the red. However, the master button controls the brightness. So bringing down takes away the brightness, and to add the brightness you can bring it up. And that's an effect available on Adobe Premiere Pro. Select the interface and select the Shift button, which will open it up in full screen so you can see the finished product. To export a clip, you simply select File, Export Media, which will open this screen in which you can view the entire film. So you have format settings. So I'll select H2.64. However, there are a variety available, such as QuickTime, that can be used for exporting. And there's also presets for different platforms. For example, YouTube HD or HD in general. I will select Vimeo HD 25 frames per second. And you can also rename the file HD Production Skills, for example. Save. And then finally, you should have the estimated file size, and you can now export, in which the file will now start encoding, and that is post-production.